phrase that's most frequently attached to any description of Mr. Zussman is that he is a very close advisor to the Prime Minister. And I've seen him quoted in the press, I hope correctly, that there is no subject that you think should not be currently on the table, and that includes full-bore union with the United States. Is that right?
We'll talk about that.
All right, come on up and let's talk about that.
Thank you for the invitation. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to be here, Moses. It truly is a great thrill. And I, too, have brought a few notes just to keep me within the time limits. I must first of all say that this is a remarkable experience. It's both exhilarating and exhausting to be in this audience and to listen to so many interesting people. I have a sense that I've just completed my undergraduate career in 2 days, and tomorrow I get my graduate. It is a remarkable way to learn, and in our organization, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, we do about 45 events a year, bringing various peoples together, and this is a most unique way to learn, and I am most impressed with this, and I've already got so many new ideas to take back to my office. The purpose of my presentation really is to as Jennifer Mondu said to me when she asked me to speak, talk about your passion. And so I want to talk to you about the thing that makes me excited about going to work every day, and that is the development of public policy. And my second objective is to engage you, if I can, or recruit you to get involved in some of those issues that I'm working on today. And so I'll spend a few minutes in the time that I've got talking about 3 particular projects that we've worked on and ways in which I hope that you might become intrigued and engaged and motivated to move on. I'd like to spend a couple of minutes talking about how I got interested in public policy, in fact, because for most people that I know that are involved in public policy on a day-to-day basis, it was a rather haphazard experience. In my particular case, I started working with young 16, 17-year-olds who were in trouble. And I began to understand that most of the sources of their trouble were not really their own making, but those due to some of our institutions, particularly their families and their educational institutions, which I felt were failing them. So I moved from there to deciding to pursue a career as a psychologist, specializing in learning strategies and education in general. But once completing my graduate studies at McGill Moses, I decided that, in fact, I wasn't going to really get anywhere moving this agenda along unless I got involved in the public policy process. So I moved from working with individuals to talking about institutions to getting involved in the policy process that defines a nation and the values that it tries to express to its individuals. Now, I now run an organization called the Public Policy Forum, which is located in Ottawa, which is a non-for-profit organization that takes on all public policy issues of interest to our stakeholders. We are a membership-based organization. We have about 175 members. But the basis of our work is that our fundamental belief is by bringing all of the stakeholders around the table, all the points of view, and addressing a common question or problem, which we all agree exists, we can fashion the most workable response and probably the right answer. And we have, over the years, and the organization's been in existence for 15 years, managed to touch on a wide range of very important public policy issues. And I wanted to spend a few minutes at least talking about 3 of them with you this afternoon. The first one is one that I've been working on for the last year and a half or so, and that has to do with the looming skills crisis in this country. Canada's in a very competitive environment today. We know that. And we also know that the answer to the so-called innovation agenda really depends on the country's ability to produce people with the right skill set. And so what we've done for the last year or so, in fact, is to travel the country coast to coast and convene roundtables along the lines that I just described to you a few minutes ago, that bring the various stakeholders in a room to talk about this issue of skills and what it is that the country needs to develop in order to remain competitive in this very difficult world that we're in. And I think one of the real recognitions around that is that the competition for talent is particularly global in nature. And so the environment that we must create in this country is fundamental to being able to produce the type of people that we need for the workforce. And one of the things that really struck me as we went around the country were a number of different things. In fact, one of the most interesting meetings we had was in Vancouver when we had the business development manager of Electronic Arts, one of those competitors for those electronic games that we saw earlier today, asking them, what are the types of skills that your employees need to move ahead in the 21st century? And of course, in my own mind, I'd already had the answer written out, computer skills, deep understanding of internet linkages. We need people with good classical education. We need people with music degrees. We need people with arts. We need people who can take the things they've learned in school and apply it in a practical way by jumping over intellectual barriers. That's what we need. And what was so intriguing about the conversation as we went across the country was the broad consensus that what we needed was a highly motivated individual with a broad set of skills that was anxious to take on the future. It didn't really matter whether they had a specific specialization in a specific area. Now, we've been pushing this agenda at the federal level and in some of the provinces quite aggressively because we came to some important realizations around some of these findings. One of the important findings I think that we've come up with is that to a person, I'd say, in those round tables across the country, not one individual stated, this is federal. No, this is provincial jurisdiction. No, the municipalities would run this. Everyone would say, we don't care about the jurisdictional issue. Push that aside. Let's keep our eye on the overriding issues, which is preparing our individuals for the future. And so some of the things that we've come up with are an encouragement to governments in particular, but I won't leave the private sector of this entirely, as I get to in a minute, is to look at these issues on a sector-by-sector basis and a community-by-community basis, and to break away from the traditional ways of looking at public policy, that is, as a provincial or a federal matter of jurisdiction, where we trade off credit for dollars and jurisdiction for argument. That's one thing. The other thing is that everyone said, over and over again, that there is nothing particularly fancy about the solution here. There is not a technological answer to skills. It's simply a matter of investing in people. And that is private sector investment in employees and public sector investment in young people. And ironically, and I find this rather discouraging, that as we talk this afternoon, we can say that, for instance, in the province of Ontario, over the last 5 years, provincial government is spending 30% less per capita on post-secondary education than they did in 1997. At the very moment that we, and the way in which we finance the post-secondary education, as we all know now, is just by simply replacing public dollars with private ones, and that is to say public dollars and higher fees. Now, the fee issue is not as much an issue as the fact that if in fact skills do matter, and we're in a competitive environment, then this is the very moment to invest in our young people. The other thing, and there are two other elements I think to this issue, and that has to do with immigrants. Over and over again, we heard across the country that as we bring and attract the immigrants, and Diane made wonderful reference, I think, to Canada's history regarding immigration, we bring in very highly skilled people, but we don't recognize their skills. And we have thousands and thousands of new immigrants in this country working at jobs that are not appropriate for them. and where they've already demonstrated a skill set that should allow them to be far more productive in our workforce. And so we've been working hard on trying to get some prior learning acknowledgement, if you like, of various types of professional groupings. And I can tell you this is hard-fought battle, and one that we certainly haven't won. The third area in the skills has to do with, in fact, Almost Frontier College and John O'Leary, who I saw yesterday. Literacy. About 30% of our workforce at this moment is not prepared, is not literate enough or numerate enough to take on the jobs of the future. We have a huge literacy problem, which we have neglected over the years, and I would encourage all of you who might be in one way or another associated with these types of endeavors to look into that. Now, to move on. Another area where I think we've been working very hard in the last year and a half has to do with, in fact, the issue that Moses raised initially, and that has to do with North American integration. Much to my surprise, about 3 years ago, when we canvassed our members for, what should we do for the next 3 years? Give us some good ideas. I was surprised by the large and wide-ranging opinion that you guys should be looking at North American integration. No one's paying attention to this issue. And the issue really is simply a matter of trying to find a way of leveraging our geography with the United States, in other words, maintaining our quality of life, standard of living, at the same time as maintaining our own values and beliefs. Now, this is turning out to be quite a large challenge. The concerns that our business people have when we talk to them has to do with the fact that Canada is experiencing lower levels of investment, that many of our corporate headquarters are moving south as operations become more integrated, and efficiencies argue for one head office. Why two? And of course, a lot of the headquarter functions that usually attach to a headquarter have also been migrating to the new corporate headquarters. We also, as business often points out, and John Manley talked about last night, have a significant productivity gap, which becomes more and more apparent as the operations of multinationals, Canada, US, become more integrated. And we've experienced, as you well know, at various times, significant brain drain in certain areas, which reverse themselves at various times. Business also argues that government just doesn't get it, that government doesn't understand, in fact, the pressures under which they are functioning today. Now, there's a whole other group of our membership, which is largely made up of the non-for-profit sector, like the YMCAs or the labor unions, that also argue that integration is important, but they think it's important for a different reason. And there they see that Canadian values are threatened by this integration. Our Canadian identity is also being challenged, and many of the programs that we've come to accept as being particularly Canadian, such as our social welfare programs and our healthcare program, is also being threatened. And so there's a tremendous tension building up, I think, within the country in a way that is being, I think, played out pretty far away from most public discourse. And in fact, we've found, in fact, over the last few years, a reluctance to talk about the issue, but more so today than ever before. And I hope, again, that this might be the issue that you might want to talk to your friends and colleagues about in the coming weeks. There's no question that for us, trade with the United States is critical. Most of you will know, but just to remind you, Canada does $2 billion a day of trade with the United States. And more importantly, over the last 10 years, the 10 years since NAFTA, this trade increased by 200%. It is an enormous change. And in fact, our standard of living, as I suggested earlier, and much of what we hold dear, has been largely fueled by the success we've been able to establish in this trade. Having said that, 87% of our trade is with the United States. So they are our major trading partner. And fortunately for us, most Americans don't know that Canada enjoys a $92 billion surplus in trade with the United States. We trade $92 billion more in exports than we do in imports, a phenomenal number. Now, the other thing that most Americans don't know is that the Americans are also integrated with us. 23% of their exports come to Canada, which in fact is more than the total trade the United States does with Japan and Mexico. We did a survey, in fact, of 2,000 Americans earlier this year, February, March, asking Americans to talk a little bit about their relationship with Canada. And most of them were unable to identify Canada as either their principal trading partner, and almost ranked as 4th and 5th and 6th in terms of export trade. So, but for us, it doesn't so much matter, at least in the short term, what Americans think or know about us. It's our recognition that this deepening integration with the United States is an important one, and one that we've been arguing needs further discussion. Now, what has to be, I suppose, talked about? Let me just suggest a couple of things. One is, we have to be able to ensure, and this is despite or in spite of September 11th, that we maintain the easy movement of both people and goods and services to the United States. This is critical to us. And I think, in fact, the federal government has done a remarkably good job, I think, given the events of September 11th and some of the mythologies that exist around our free passage of individuals, or Canada being a safe haven, to get past that and to build in some very, very useful and advantageous new measures for Canada. We must find a better way of resolving our disputes with the United States. The latest softwood lumber dispute, which has been simmering for 15 years probably, is another example to us is that they don't play fair. And their system is so different than ours that even the assurances of the executive office that I will fix this or we will fix this does not carry enough weight to ensure that these types of disputes, which are extraordinarily harmful to Canada's economy, aren't remedied. We have to come up with a North American strategy regarding the environment and energy. We are, as you can see, as you know, skirting around the Kyoto commitments that we made, in large part because the United States has refused to participate to the same level that we have, and we were caught out if we signed Kyoto, imposing a harder and stricter set of standards on Canadian industry that the Americans would put on themselves. We've got to find a way of resolving those types of issues. We're going to have to come to grips, finally, with a foreign policy and a defense policy that's both independent and is mindful of an American government that has its own preoccupations today. We have to look and have some discussion among ourselves about what our relationship should be with Mexico, because the Mexicans, by the way, think they have a great relationship with us, and we're part of their strategy. And I don't think we've made any public pronouncements on that. And lastly, an issue that I've been talking a lot about in Ottawa is that our governments have got to get far more integrated in the way in which they approach Canadian-U.S. issues. We do it too much on an ad hoc basis, departmental basis, and we don't appear to have any coherent strategy. And I'm now running out of time. Okay, well, unfortunately, I left the one that I consider to be the most important last, so I'll race very quickly through that. Another area where we have spent a lot of time in the last few years, and I've actually been working on this area for almost 20 years, is the declining trust in our public institutions, or institutions in general. Very quickly, we have a number of our institutions that are under attack, both in Canada and elsewhere, and we collectively have got to figure out a way to build them up, because it is our institutions, just like that Michael Ignatieff talked about yesterday morning, and our rule of law that allows us the types of freedoms and opportunities that we must have in this country. We have our institutions that are in trouble are the following: our business institutions, our media, our professional institutions like our accounting professions, our religious institutions, and in particular, our political ones. And ironically, let me just speak very briefly about the political ones. I don't think for a moment that our political institutions are less honest than they were 5, 10, 20 years ago. I think a number of things have happened, which is all for the good. We have changing expectations about the role of government in society. We are far better educated. We ask tougher questions, and we have much more access to information, which allows us to ask the tough questions. And finally, the media is far more vigilant than it was 20 and 30 years ago about the goings-on in government. So, very quickly, and before I get yanked off the stage, and maybe Preston Manning will address some of this a little later on, we've got a big job of educating our public. The schools have a responsibility to teach civics. We have done a number of studies over the years that shows our political literacy is dreadfully low in this country. You can't take our democracy for granted and our institutions. We have to force it through the schools to have people engaged at a young age. We have to look to Parliament. We have a whole bunch of things to do around that, and we have to deal with our political leaders and some of the problems that they're experiencing around ethics today. And very quickly, these are our various conflict of interest issues that have emerged, election funding, the handling of lobbyists and political campaigns, and the need for far more transparency in government. I have now been flashed a thank you sign, so I want to thank you all for listening so carefully. Thank you. Thanks very much.